In 1990, a routine fishing trip turned into a chilling maritime mystery. The small boat Casey Nicole vanished at sea, leaving one man clinging to a raft and three others missing. What followed was a desperate survival tale and a series of bizarre phone calls that continue to haunt the case. On April 12, 1990, four commercial fishermen set sail from the docks of Richmond Hill, Georgia, on a week-long expedition aboard the Casey Nicole. The 34-foot snapper boat had just come out of 5 weeks in dry dock for maintenance and was presumed to be in good shape. The crew consisted of 23-year-old Captain Billy Joe Neesmith, his brother Nathan, 32, their nephew Keith Wilkes, 18, and friend Franklin Brantley, 23. Their plan was to motor about 90 miles out to a fishing spot near Tiger's Ledge off the South Carolina coast, hoping for a big catch. For the first day, the trip was uneventful. But in the pre-dawn hours of April 13th, as the Casey Nicole cruised in darkness, Nathan noticed the boat was struggling against the waves. Nathan woke Billy Joe, the captain, and they discovered the vessel was taking on water. About a foot of it had flooded the engine room. The electric bilge pumps refused to work, so the men woke the others and formed a bucket brigade to bail out the rising seawater. Nathan got off a mayday call on the radio, but no help answered in time. Within minutes, the engine died and the lights went out as seawater shorted the boat's power. With the Casey Nicole slowly sinking and no rescue in sight, the crew had no choice but to abandon ship. The four men piled into the boat's small inflatable life raft. To their dismay, the raft was rotted and leaky, and it even had a gaping hole that caused it to deflate. By dawn, their feet were in the cold Atlantic as the raft sank beneath them. Fortunately, one of the boat's large hatch covers, lined with foam, broke loose and floated by. The crew grabbed onto this makeshift flotation device. Even with the hatch cover, however, it was barely enough to keep them all above water. Space and buoyancy were limited. One crew member was immobilized by severe leg cramps, and another didn't know how to swim, so they had to remain clinging on top of the hatch cover. Nathan, the largest of the group at about 250 pounds, found that if he tried to pull himself fully onto the debris, it would sink under their combined weight. Realizing the raft couldn't support four people, Nathan made a fateful decision. He told the others he would try to swim back to the partially submerged Casey Nicole and get help or supplies. The others shouted for him not to go. Standard survival wisdom is to stay together. But Nathan felt he had no other option. Nathan struck out alone across the waves, determined to reach the capsized boat's hull, visible a few miles away. After an arduous swim that took most of the day, he finally reached the Casey Nicole's overturned hull by nightfall. Exhausted, he hoisted himself onto the slippery stern and clung there through the night. By morning, his three crewmates and their hatch cover raft were nowhere in sight. As the sun rose on Nathan's second day adrift, a huge freighter appeared on the horizon not far from where he had last seen the others. From his vantage point, Nathan watched the freighter slow and make an odd series of stops near that area. He even saw puffs of smoke from the ship's engines, as if it was hauling something aboard. He dared to hope the cargo ship might be rescuing his stranded brother and friends. A few hours later, the freighter continued on its way and disappeared, leaving Nathan alone once more, with only that hopeful possibility. Nathan survived 2 more days on the open ocean. In a stroke of luck, a large styrofoam-lined bait box popped up to the surface. Nathan climbed into this improvised lifeboat and floated, praying for rescue. He battled thirst, hunger, and delirium, at times imagining he heard voices on the wind calling his name. Finally, after 4 days lost at sea, Nathan was spotted and picked up by a passing boat about 20 miles off the Georgia coast. He was sunburned and barely conscious, but alive. The Casey Nichols wreck was found later that day, capsized and empty. He was literally hours away from disaster. Of his 3 crewmates, however, there was no trace. Despite an intensive search by the Coast Guard covering thousands of square miles, Billy Joe, Keith, and Franklin were never found. In the months after the sinking, the families of the missing men refused to give up hope. Then, about 6 months later in October 1990, they received a bizarre sign. On the same day, both the Neesmith family and boat owner Doug Tyson got mysterious phone calls from a man speaking Spanish. The caller knew their unlisted numbers and would only say the family's name and phone number in broken English, as if confirming he had the right person. He didn't ask for anything or explain himself. Over the next few months, more cryptic calls came, a total of 5 to the Neesmiths and 3 to the Tysons. In the final call on March 6, 1991, the stranger briefly spoke in English to deliver one haunting message. He said he was, quote, bringing them home. Then the line cut off. After that, the calls stopped forever with no explanation. These unexplained calls fueled the family's belief that the 3 missing fishermen might still be alive somewhere. The Neesmiths theorized that the freighter Nathan saw did indeed rescue Billy Joe, Keith, and Franklin, only to take them captive for reasons unknown. Perhaps the crew of that ship intended to ransom them or otherwise keep them hidden, and one sympathetic crew member risked calling with clues. The Spanish-speaking caller and talk of bringing them home led to speculation that the men could have been taken to a foreign country like Cuba. The families pursued leads in Latin America for years, but no concrete evidence ever surfaced. To this day, the fate of the Casey Nichols crew remains unsolved. In the absence of hard evidence, a number of theories have circulated. The simplest explanation is that the 3 men succumbed to the elements at sea, and that Nathan's account of the freighter was either mistaken or a hallucination born of exhaustion. In fact, Nathan admitted to hallucinating due to a combination of lack of sleep and water, as well as the extreme stress of the situation. Indeed, authorities leaned toward the conclusion that the men were lost at sea in 1990. However, the complete lack of debris or bodies, despite the massive search, leaves room for doubt. Others find the freighter scenario compelling. Some suspect the crew might have been picked up by a ship involved in illicit activity. The mysterious phone calls support the idea of the men being held in a Spanish-speaking region or by Spanish-speaking captors. Boosters of this theory claim that the calls ending after the bringing them home message suggest the caller may have been discovered and silenced. The authorities even questioned Nathan's story, given that he was the only survivor, though they quickly ruled him out as a suspect, and his narrative has stayed consistent. Notably, if this case sounds familiar, the story of the Casey Nicole was featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that originally aired in 1992. Despite the tens of millions of eyes this brought to the tragedy and the odd phone calls, no new leads emerged from this effort. For Karen and Michael Laspizza, the morning of August 30th, 2013, began with a knock at the door and devastating news. Instead of welcoming their 19-year-old son Bryce home from college, they faced a California Highway Patrol officer who informed them that Bryce's SUV had been found crashed. It was near Castaic Lake with his phone, laptop, and wallet inside, but there was no sign of Bryce himself. Bryce was a sophomore at Sierra College in Northern California. In the 2 weeks before his disappearance, those close to him noticed alarming changes in his behavior. Normally outgoing and friendly, he became withdrawn, erratic, and depressed. Bryce's roommate, Sean Dixon, observed that Bryce had started drinking heavily and taking the stimulant medication Vyvanse without a prescription. He even gave away some of his prized possessions, including his Xbox console and a pair of sentimental diamond earrings. These uncharacteristic actions set off massive alarm bells among his friends and family. On August 27, 2013, Bryce's behavior took another strange turn. He abruptly broke up with his longtime girlfriend, Kim Sly, telling her she would be better off without him. That same day, he sent an emotional text to Sean, thanking him for being a great friend and implying that Sean had saved his soul. This dramatic, farewell-like message was entirely out of character and left his friends concerned. Despite these red flags, Bryce insisted he was fine and planned to drive home to his parents. On the night of August 28th, he visited Kim at her apartment in Chico one last time. Kim grew so worried about Bryce's state that she took away his car keys to stop him from driving. Bryce called his mother for help. Karen offered to fly up to Northern California the next day if Bryce needed support. He told her not to worry and said he had, quote, a lot to talk about with her, but that he would do it later and not over the phone. Relieved that Bryce seemed calm, Karen then instructed Kim to return Bryce's keys, a decision that would prove fateful. Around 11:30 p.m., Bryce left Kim's apartment and began the long drive south toward his family's home in Laguna Niguel. By the morning of August 29th, Bryce had barely made any progress toward home. At 11 o'clock that morning, his parents learned that he had used their roadside assistance service after running out of gas near a town called Button Willow. This was roughly halfway between Chico and Laguna Niguel. A mechanic named Christian delivered fuel to Bryce's stranded Toyota Highlander. Before he got the assistance call, he had noticed that Bryce had been sitting in the same spot for several hours without moving on. Even then, Bryce didn't arrive as expected. As evening fell with no sign of their son, the family filed a missing person report. Police tracked Bryce's cell phone signal and discovered he was still in the Buttonwillow area late that night. Officers found Bryce in his car by the roadside, not far from where he had gotten gas. He was awake and showed no signs of intoxication. When asked why he was still there, Bryce said he was just taking some time after some heavy personal events. Since he seemed fine and was doing nothing illegal, the officers let him go after he promised to head straight home and call his parents. Around 10 that evening, Bryce finally resumed his journey south on Interstate 5. A few hours later, in the early morning darkness of August 30th, Bryce made one final phone call. At 2:08, he spoke to his mom and said he was too tired to continue driving and would pull off to sleep in his car for a while. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Surveillance footage later showed that instead of stopping to rest, Bryce's SUV exited I-5 near Castaic Lake at around 2:15. Another camera sighting around 4:30 suggested he was still in that area more than 2 hours later. What happened over the next couple of hours remains unknown. Sometime before dawn, California Highway Patrol officers found Bryce's Toyota Highlander crashed down a 15-foot embankment off an access road by the lake. The SUV was on its side with a shattered back window. Inside the wreck, officers found Bryce's phone, laptop, wallet, and clothes, but no Bryce. There was no blood or any sign of injury at the scene. It appeared Bryce had escaped the crash unharmed and then disappeared into the night. The discovery of Bryce's abandoned car prompted an extensive search around Castaic Lake. Divers scoured the lake but found no trace of him. On land, bloodhounds picked up Bryce's scent and followed it from the crash site to a truck stop on the other side of the dam, where the trail abruptly ended. This suggested that Bryce left the area on foot and possibly caught a ride from that truck stop, essentially vanishing without a trace. Days later, on September 4th, firefighters responding to a brush fire near Castaic Lake discovered a burned body close to where Bryce's vehicle had been found, raising fears that it was him. However, the coroner confirmed that the body belonged to an unrelated individual and not to Bryce. Despite exhaustive searches by authorities and volunteers, to this day no sign of Bryce Laspisa has ever been found. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed to explain Bryce's baffling disappearance. One possibility is that Bryce intended to end himself. His erratic behavior, sudden breakup, and cryptic goodbyes could indicate this intent. Yet the complete lack of a body makes this theory inconclusive, especially since he was on foot, and there's also the matter of the bloodhound evidence. Another theory is that Bryce survived the crash, but suffered a head injury or psychological break that left him disoriented. In that state, he might have wandered away and succumbed to the elements or gotten lost. Still, if he had stayed nearby, search teams likely would have found him. The fact that bloodhounds tracked his scent to a truck stop suggests an alternate scenario. Bryce may have intentionally walked away to start a new life. If he caught a ride from that truck stop, he could be anywhere, potentially living under a different identity. His decision to leave behind his phone and wallet might indicate he didn't want to be tracked, or it could simply mean he wasn't thinking clearly. Personally, though, I have to speculate that he may have met with foul play at that truck stop. He may have gotten in the wrong truck and met up with a driver who had some pretty serious ill intentions. But the thing is, this hypothesis doesn't require the initial driver who picked him up to have been a bad guy. That driver could have simply taken him to a different truck stop far away where he may have run into trouble. This is made doubly more difficult because he could have run into numerous Good Samaritan drivers in multiple states before running into a predator. More than a decade has passed since Bryce vanished, and his fate is still a complete mystery. Given the lack of evidence as it currently stands, his parents continue to hold on to hope that Bryce may still be out there somewhere. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and share this video if you're enjoying it, and to hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget you can check out my content on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by searching up Lazy Chill True Crime and Lazy Chill History. In 1945, the United States ambassador in Moscow received a wooden plaque of the Great Seal of the United States as a goodwill gift. Little did he know, inside this diplomatic gift was a covert listening device that was so ingeniously designed, it fed American secrets to the Soviets for years without detection. For 6 years, this carved seal hung quietly in the ambassador's office, while Soviet intelligence eavesdropped on conversations at the highest levels. The bugging device hidden within, later dubbed the Thing, was unlike any bug the world had seen, a passive device with no battery or wires that stayed silent until activated by the Soviets. The secret listening device inside the Great Seal was the brainchild of Soviet inventor Leon Theremin, the famed inventor of the bizarre instrument that bears his name. Unlike typical spy bugs of the era, Theremin's creation had no active transmitter, no wires, and no power source of its own. It consisted of a tiny metal cylinder with a thin diaphragm, acting as a microphone, attached to a long antenna, a passive cavity resonator, cleverly concealed inside the wooden seal. When Soviet operatives beamed a high-frequency radio signal at the ambassador's office from a van outside, this hidden device would come to life. The radio waves illuminated the bug, energizing it, and prompting it to retransmit an audio signal. As people spoke in the room, sound waves vibrated the device's diaphragm, which modulated the incoming radio beam. The device then reflected a tuned signal outwards, carrying the voices of unwitting American diplomats. The Great Seal ornament was transformed into a transmitter only when the Soviets activated it remotely. Once the external radio beam was switched off, the device went dormant and broadcast nothing at all, blending back into the woodwork. This novel design utterly baffled Western security experts when the thing was finally uncovered. Because it had no battery and no obvious electronic circuits, it wasn't immediately clear how the bug operated, or even what it was supposed to do. British and American engineers scrutinizing the tiny apparatus initially struggled to understand its function. It reportedly took technical officers about 2 months of analysis to figure out that the device was an ingenious passive transmitter, powered by an external radio beam. The simplicity and elegance of Theremin's bug were unprecedented. It was reliable, had an essentially unlimited operational life, and needed no maintenance. The time it took to identify that the thing was actually spyware has been subject to significant historical controversy. The device's very design was the perfect cloak. Traditional bug sweepers in the 1940s hunted for telltale electric signals or power sources. However, Theremin's device was effectively invisible to detection equipment until the exact moment it was in use. Unless the Soviets were beaming their radio signal at the seal, the bug lay electrically dormant. No signal at all for any scanner to pick up. This made it nearly impossible to detect during routine security sweeps of the ambassador's office. Technicians could sweep the room with radio detectors and hear only silence if the Soviet truck outside wasn't transmitting. In addition, the bug was physically tiny and deeply embedded inside a thick wooden carving. Even if technicians had suspected the seal, they would have had to literally carve it open to find the device hidden inside. It simply never occurred to anyone that this gift, presented by a group of Soviet school children as a token of friendship, would house such a sophisticated spy tool. Another reason the thing remained hidden so long was that it was used sparingly and strategically. The KGB didn't need to have the device transmitting constantly. Instead, they likely activated it only at opportune moments when they knew valuable conversations were happening and when the risk of detection was low. The absence of any internal power supply also meant the bug never ran out of juice. It could keep working indefinitely, ready to be switched on whenever needed. All these factors combined to allow the Great Seal bug to lurk over the ambassador's desk for years, quietly doing its job without arousing suspicion. The eventual discovery of the thing came about by a mix of accident and clever sleuthing. In 1951, British radio operators in Moscow were monitoring Soviet military radio traffic when they accidentally picked up something odd. They heard English-language voices discussing American matters in distinctly American accents. These stray transmissions of American diplomatic conversations raised alarm bells, hinting that a Soviet eavesdropping device was at work. Alerted by this find, the State Department sent security experts to sweep the American ambassador's residence for hidden bugs. Initial sweeps turned up nothing, unsurprisingly, since the device wasn't actively broadcasting. Finally, the team tried a more dramatic tactic. Ambassador George F. Kennan himself helped bait the trap. He conspicuously pretended to dictate an important confidential memo in his study, while technicians quietly moved a receiver around the room, listening for any unusual signals. After some tense moments, the trick paid off. As Kennan spoke, the hidden bug signal was detected coming from the Great Seal plaque on the wall. Technicians pried the wooden seal open and found the tiny metal antenna and resonant cavity of Theremin's device inside. This confirmed that the seemingly innocent gift from the Soviet schoolchildren to the people of America was indeed a Trojan horse. Once the bug was in American hands in 1952, intelligence chose not to tip off the Soviets immediately. Instead, they quietly studied the device in labs and even considered using it to feed misinformation back to the KGB. Beyond learning the technology, the Americans also realized they had gained a powerful piece of political leverage. They waited for an opportune moment to reveal their find. That moment came in May 1960, in the wake of the Soviets' shoot-down of a U-2 spy plane. During a heated UN Security Council meeting, Soviet delegates were denouncing American espionage. That's when Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr. pulled out the Great Seal carving and exposed its hidden secret to the world. In front of a stunned international audience, Lodge explained how the gift from 1945 had contained a listening device all along. I have to imagine that this reveal was heavily debated before it actually happened. After all, this Trojan horse could only have been more literal if it was an actual wooden horse. These concerns clearly put aside, the revelation was dramatic and effective. It embarrassed the Soviet leadership and undercut their moral high ground on the U-2 incident. Lodge even asserted that over 100 similar Soviet bugs had been found in U.S. embassies and facilities abroad. In the aftermath, the thing became one of the most infamous spy gadgets of the era. Its story was like something out of a James Bond film or a spy novel, a seemingly benign plaque that silently listened to diplomats' conversations for years. The engineering lessons from Theramon's device would inform future surveillance technology, while U.S. counterintelligence grew far more wary of gift-bearing adversaries. One lingering question in the story of the Great Seal bug is whether a traitor inside the American embassy tipped off the Soviets about when to activate it. Historians have debated this for decades, but no hard evidence has ever confirmed an internal mole. The Soviets didn't technically need a spy inside the ambassador's office to make the thing effective. Its activation could be timed using external clues, such as known meetings, visiting delegations, or predictable diplomatic routines. American embassies followed fairly regular schedules. High-level conversations often occurred during set hours, after formal meetings, or when senior officials were present. Soviet intelligence services, including the KGB, maintained constant surveillance of the embassy building itself, watching arrivals, departures, and patterns of activity. That said, Moscow was saturated with espionage, and the United States later uncovered multiple cases of insiders passing information to the Soviets. This makes the idea of an internal tipster plausible, though still unproven. Imagine waking up to the revelation that you're not in the 21st century, but actually in 1729. More bizarre still is that this doesn't require any sci-fi plot or fantasy elements. 3 whole centuries of history were supposedly made up and never occurred. This wild scenario is exactly what the phantom time hypothesis proposes. It's a conspiracy theory suggesting that nearly 300 years of the early Middle Ages were inserted into the calendar by ambitious rulers and filled with fake history. The phantom time hypothesis is a pseudo-historical theory first put forward in the 1990s by a German historian named Herbert Illig. According to Illig, the period between 614 and 911 never truly happened, but rather they were fabricated. In Illig's version of history, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II conspired to rewrite the calendar. They supposedly wanted to place themselves at the prestigious year AD 1000, believing it to be a millennial milestone with great Christian significance. To achieve this, the theory claims, these leaders added 297 years to history, adjusting dates and events so that their own reigns would include the magic year 1000. In this bizarre alternate timeline, entire chapters of medieval history were allegedly invented out of whole cloth. For example, Charlemagne, the founder of the Holy Roman Empire, would never have existed, and the state he supposedly founded would be nothing more than an invention. Likewise, the Viking raids on England and even entire dynasties such as China's Tang dynasty would be misdated or completely made up. In short, Illig argued that nearly 3 centuries worth of events across Europe and beyond were forged after the fact, creating a phantom period of history. Illig and his supporters pointed to a few historical oddities which they believed hinted that something was wrong with the accepted timeline. One major point was the scarcity of documentary and archaeological evidence in Western Europe for the 7th to 9th centuries. He pointed out that relatively few chronicles or original records survive from that period, a fact he found highly suspicious. To him, this void in the historical record suggested that the era might have been concocted later to fill a gap. Illig also claimed that some buildings dated to the 10th century had surprisingly Roman-like design elements that seemed out of place for the era. He took this as another sign that the timeline of the Roman Empire and its aftermath had been distorted. According to him, medieval builders were closer in time to ancient Rome than conventional history admits. The most famous evidence Illig cited was a calendar quirk. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII's reform of the Julian calendar dropped 10 days to realign with the seasons. Illig argued that if the Julian calendar had truly been running since 45 BC, it should have been off by about 13 days by 1582, not just 10. And funny enough, his math on this was correct, but there was a problem with his reasoning that I'll address in a moment. To him, this hinted that roughly 3 centuries worth of days had never actually passed at all. To achieve this goal, the story imagines that Otto, Sylvester, and their allies ordered monks and scribes to manufacture documents, chronicles, and artifacts for the phantom years. Fake battles, phony royal lineages, and forged charters would have been planted in libraries and archives, tricking future historians. It's an incredibly elaborate notion. A handful of men in the early medieval era supposedly managed to fool the world by inserting a phantom era into our history books. But this, of course, is the major flaw in Illig's theory, the massive scale of the alleged forgery. If the years 614 to 911 AD were invented, it's not only European history that must be falsified, but also the histories of multiple civilizations. During those centuries, the Byzantine Empire and the emerging Caliphate were locked in conflicts, and Tang Dynasty China experienced a golden age of art and science. These were all recorded in detail, and these records around the world line up with our current calendar. For phantom time to be real, virtually every scholar and record keeper from Europe to Asia would have to be complicit in the same lie, an almost impossible scenario. Even within Europe alone, the hoax would have to be astonishingly thorough. Think of the countless artifacts, manuscripts, inscriptions, and coins dated to the early Middle Ages. All of them would need to be misdated or forged to fool later historians. Yet archaeologists have unearthed many such items, and their dating fits neatly into the expected timeline. Numerous monastic records, legal documents, and chronicles from Europe's 7th to 10th centuries survive and dovetail with events before and after. Fabricating 3 centuries of such widely attested history without leaving glaring inconsistencies would perhaps be the most audacious undertaking in human history. If hundreds of years were missing, we would also expect to see clues in nature or science, but we don't. Dendrochronology, the dating of wood by tree rings, provides continuous year-by-year timelines stretching well before the 7th century, and it shows no gaps or jumps in sequence. Likewise, historical astronomy serves as a check on chronology. Ancient and medieval observers around the world recorded celestial events that match our timeline. For example, Roman writings note a solar eclipse in 59 AD that astronomers today can pinpoint to that same year. If nearly 3 extra centuries had been inserted into history, those recorded eclipses and appearances of Halley's Comet would be shifted and inconsistent. Finally, the calendar oddity Illig emphasized has a simple explanation. The Gregorian reform of 1582 dropped 10 days not to correct back to Julius Caesar's time, but to realign with the Council of Nicaea in 325. By 1582, about 1,257 years had passed since 325, which corresponds to a 10-day drift, roughly 1 day per 128 years. The church was resetting the calendar to where it had been in 325, so a 10-day correction was exactly what was needed, with no mysterious missing centuries required. When all is said and done, the phantom time hypothesis is a fascinating thought experiment, but not a serious account of history. Mainstream historians and archaeologists universally reject the idea that the early Middle Ages were an elaborate hoax. There is simply too much evidence that those centuries did occur and were filled with real people, conflicts, and cultural shifts. While it's true that historical records around the 7th to 9th centuries in Europe are relatively sparse, this was due to Europe being at a low point economically.